Gunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and it is finally time for my review of the 11th, holy moly, studio album from the psychedelic trance duo Infected Mushroom, Head of NASA and the Two Amish Boys. Geez, that was a mouthful. If for some reason you aren't familiar with Infected Mushroom, it's probably time for a history lesson. These guys have been making music since before I was born, and they're largely considered to be pioneers in the world of psytrance. Historically, one of the best-selling musical acts to ever come out of Israel. They've also had a ton of appeal to people outside of the electronic dance music world, as they've crossed over numerous times into classical music, into metal, into industrial music. Funny enough, I actually personally was not introduced to Infected Mushroom's music through the EDM scene, but rather a friend from high school who was really into rock music. Not to say that I had never heard of Infected Mushroom prior to that point, but it was hearing their ability to cross over that kind of got me interested in them to begin with, and my interests were further maintained when I went to check out their Friends on Mushrooms project, which had collaborations with different producers who I had come to know and enjoy, like Pegboard Nerds and Savant. And though the Pegboard Nerds were obviously mainstays with Monstercat, I never could have seen Infected Mushroom eventually releasing there. So of course, when Infected Mushroom announced that they would be releasing Spitfire on Monstercat in late 2017, I was a bit confused, shocked, and also excited. And not necessarily because I'm the biggest Infected Mushroom fan in the world. In fact, I'll be honest with you guys, I had never actually listened through a full-length studio LP from Infected Mushroom up to this point. I was just really excited to see what was once a small, independent Canadian record label pulling in such a big name as Infected Mushroom. And though I didn't actually think Spitfire was anything all that fantastic, I did think it was a good choice of a song to be introducing the Monstercat fan base to psytrance and Infected Mushrooms brand of that sound. Fun fact, the Wikipedia page for this song actually quotes me saying something very similar, but that's beside the point. The fact of the matter is that this was and still is a pretty big deal. Infected Mushroom isn't just a hot act that's kind of in right now. They are a duo with a lot of history, and they've left a massive legacy and impact in the world of EDM. I'm not entirely sure I could say the same about any other project that's ever signed with Monstercat. I mean, I guess there's Rusko, but that was a remix, it wasn't really a signing. For whatever reason, I was still really surprised when Infected Mushroom announced an album release on Monstercat alongside the release of Walking on the Moon on the Rocket League soundtrack. Infected Mushroom has always been a more album-oriented project, so I shouldn't have really been that surprised, but still for some reason it did catch me off guard. Leading up to the release of Head of NASA, I did spend some time digging into Infected Mushroom's essentials and checking out some of their studio albums. I of course didn't listen to all 10 because frankly that's a lot of Infected Mushroom to go through, but I got a good taste of their general discography and their general progression as an act from the 90s to modern day. And I've got to say, I am genuinely glad I did that because it introduced me to a ton of great music, especially in Infected Mushroom's early discography. When this album came out though, I honestly couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. And don't get me wrong, I think calling this album bad would be absolutely blasphemous. Infected Mushroom's production is beyond fantastic. They're still making what is, in my opinion, the most creative, unique, and compelling psychedelic trance music on the market today. I mean, I would definitely rather listen to Head of NASA than a new psytrance album from Vini Vici or, God forbid, Armin van Buuren. I also think, in a really strange way, this album isn't really doing much. As I kind of preluded this review with, the thing that I think made Infected Mushroom so great to begin with was their ability to experiment with different genres, different sounds, different approaches in order to make every project sound distinct from the next. For example, Classical Mushroom saw them meshing together psytrance with classical music. Vicious Delicious saw them infusing, metal, new metal, hip-hop with psytrance. BP Empire saw them dabbling delving into industrial and ambient music. Head of NASA and the two Amish boys, though, doesn't really see the duo treading in any new waters. Though I wouldn't say this is the first Infected Mushroom album to kind of fall into that category. I feel like the duo has kind of been caught in the same sonic headspace since 2012's Army of Mushrooms and maybe even earlier, with the exception of Converting Vegetarians 2, because that was a very different album for Infected Mushroom to be releasing in this age of their career. But most of these projects tend to be, honestly, a bit formulaic. And definitely not formulaic in the sense that they've fallen prey to some recent EDM trend or anything like that, because this project is far from trendy, but formulaic in the sense that they seem to be trapped within their own sound and afraid to explore areas outside of their current sonic bubble. I guess they've found a sound that people identify with, and people aren't going to get angry if they keep releasing music in that same vein without kind of expanding outward. And there are definitely some projects where I'm okay with that, especially with concept albums. Albums that explore a particular story or theme in depth, but this LP doesn't really do that either. To give them some credit, this album is loosely based on some themes of space. Some of the song titles make reference to this. Of course, there's Head of NASA and then Walking on the Moon, which is actually a song that doesn't really talk much about space. It's just about finding your happy place. BLiSS on Mushrooms has a little bit of dialogue, which talks about an alien invasion. And then of course there's Lost in Space, which probably has the greatest use of astronomical imagery on the entire album. And beside the fact that so many of the songs carry such a similar formula, that's really the only thing that ties these tracks together. This album is also Infected Mushroom's shortest by about 20 minutes, and it's the first LP they've ever put out that's been under an hour long. And that's not necessarily a criticism, because this is actually one of the longest LPs that Monstercat has ever put out, but I just thought it was a bit interesting. I saw a bit of speculation as to what the title of this album meant, and the most compelling thing that I saw was that the Head of NASA essentially represents the progression and the closeness of technology, while the two Amish boys would essentially represent the opposite of that, remaining distant from technology. I just wish that this album would sonically represent those two polar ideals coming together. I mean, this album would have been the perfect opportunity for Infected Mushroom to experiment with musical genres that don't rely on the innovations of technology. Bluegrass, country, gospel could have all given this album some very cool sonic flair, but Head of NASA, plain and simply, just isn't quite that ambitious. With all that out of the way, I would like to say there are a number of moments on this album that I did thoroughly enjoy. BLiSS on Mushrooms just has such a crazy progression from start to finish, it's almost hard to believe you're not listening to 3 different songs in one. I especially love that final climax of the song where it feels like these glitchy synths are trying to converse with you. There's this section in Chenchen Barvaz where it just sounds like the synths are screaming at you, which is weird, but I love it nonetheless. Walking on the Moon is just as enjoyable and groovy as I remember it. It's got some great pop flavor, and it's probably the most melodic-leaning song on the entire album. It's the song that got me the most excited for this album, and fittingly, probably still my favorite cut from the LP. Additionally, I can't say I found another song in Infected Mushroom's discography that's really sounded like this one, so it remains as a unique cut for me. And then there's Lost in Space, which I definitely say is my second favorite from this project. It's extremely ambitious, especially considering that this is their first Monstercat album. I never expected when I was going through this for the first time to hear Hebrew. Funny enough, I actually love the Hebrew vocals. I think they fit great in with the song's production and theme. And I know it's a remix of Lost in Space by Tuna, and I did check out that version of the song. I gotta say, I really like both versions, but I especially enjoy this one. I obviously couldn't understand the lyrics, and I had to use a translator to figure out exactly what Tuna was talking about, but I do really like his imagery on this song a lot. And I thought it was hilarious, even plugged into the translator, the rhyming scheme and the flow of the lyrics still kinda works. But yeah, I think that's probably the most ambitious thing on this entire album. There were a couple moments on this album here and there that definitely knocked me off my feet, but for the most part, I'd say this album dished out exactly what I expected from Infected Mushroom. I'd say Head of NASA is at least commendable because I would never hear this project and mistake it for anyone other than Infected Mushroom, and someone who's never listened to the duo before will probably end up getting floored by this album, which is probably why Monstercat decided to put it out in the first place. But me, for the most part, I'm just not all that interested. For Head of NASA and the two Amish boys, I am feeling a decent 6.5 out of 10. As always, if you guys haven't listened to this album, you can check it out by clicking the Spotify link down in the description below. And if you have listened to it already, make sure to let me know what you think down in the comment section. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the review. I'm Landon Remixes, and I'll catch you later. Peace.